Faza'il A'maal, More Trouble Than It's Worth, Part 3, Carelessness. Let's have a look at a fabricated hadith.
For example, in the Fadail of Salah, in the virtues of Salah, there is the long hadith about the one who is mindful about Salah, and he will be given certain rewards, and he will be given, the one who is not will be given certain punishments. You can see the hadith on your screen. In the Arabic itself, which nobody reads, and everybody reads the English or Urdu or Farsi or whatever else, because this was not written originally in Arabic. But in the Arabic, whoever was doing the tahqiq of the book, he says, ذكر السيوطي hadith باطل. يعني Imam al-Suyuti himself, the hadith is باطل. And this hadith, Imam al-Suyuti is actually mentioned under the ahadith that are mawdu'. This is a fabrication. Even the author says he can't find it in the books of hadith. Yani there is no sanad, there is no chain to tie it to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam.
In part 3, I want to clarify that there's no point in this series of bringing screenshots of the FA, Faza'il A'maal, and showing the Arabic and showing the English and showing the Urdu and the Persian, because if you want to find examples of fabrications and weak and baseless narrations, the examples are legion. There are many sites and many individuals that have spoken about this. So what I'll do now is I'll continue with the chronological, linear progression of the thesis. I'll quote this page, which is found on page number 48, and it's right in the middle of the thesis, so hopefully when I come to the latter part of this video, I'll explain what certain terms mean, specifically the terms isnad, asanid, etc. So it says, some scholars use the expression hadith la asla lahu, a hadith that has no root. And they say that this hadith, this narration that has no root, can have several meanings. Meaning, firstly, there's no isnad for the hadith, neither in a book of hadith or a book that's not hadithic in nature, and so it has no value whatsoever. So this is one example of a hadith that has no base, it's totally baseless. And then in the bottom, he's quoting this and he comments upon this point. Point number 75. Like the hadith in the Faza'il A'maal, the virtues of prayer, Sheikh Zakaria said, I did not find this in the books of hadith that I have. Meaning, he quoted a hadith that he could not find in any books of hadith that he had. And this is what Dr. Turkistany says. What surprises us really is the selection of this specific hadith by the author, Sheikh Zakaria. Even though it has no isnad, from among the hundreds of authentic and dependable ahadith in the books of Islamic heritage, which have asanid. Asanid is the plural of isnad. Thus, if he avoided mentioning this hadith in this book, it would have been better in our view. So, an example, he gives the page number, you can pause it and find exactly which hadith, but from previous experience, you won't have to look very far, because these sorts of instances and these sorts of evidences can be found across many YouTube channels, many books, in the English and in the Arabic and in the Urdu and in the Persian language. So if you want to find evidences of weak hadith or mawdu, fabricated hadith, there's many examples, and the point of this series is not to show you those examples. Then he continues, he says on page number 56, he says the following. And this again is right back in the middle of the thesis. It says, some people claim that Tablighi Nisab contains a lot of weak and fabricated hadith. And this is the critics of the book that actually say this. But perhaps it could be that the author had relied upon books that had been criticized by other scholars of hadith. So specialists who had criticized the books of hadith that he relied upon, even though they had been criticized, he still relied upon those books. That's what basically it's saying. And another thing, he could have taken those hadiths not to be extremely weak. So he knew they were weak, but he thought that they were not extremely weak. So in addition to the first category, where he quotes hadith that have no foundation and that he can't find in any books that are with him, he also will quote hadiths that he knows have been criticized by specialists. But what does he say about this? What is Turkistany's opinion on this? He says, there are a group of scholars who believe that acting upon such types of hadith is allowed. However, it is necessary that the hadith of the book are studied extensively, meaning these books in the FA, as the author may have actually been careless about mentioning fabricated and severely weak hadith. And Turkistany is not anti-Sheikh Zakaria, but he's calling him careless here. And I think that's being kind. And he says at the bottom in the footnote, some of the critics of the book have generalized and exaggerated their criticism. We do not agree with this exaggeration. We just want to get to the objective study of the book. We just want to get to the crux of the book. We're not here to judge anyone. But quite clearly from these two quotes, it's showing us that this book is full of 56% in fact full of weak and fabricated narrations. Enough of the TJ and the FA. Now we come to a book which is a book that Dr. Azami mentioned when he wrote his introductory beginner book, and it was published originally before 1961, or in around about the published date is 1961, and it was this book by a scholar called Mohammed Zubair Siddiqui. And Mohammed Zubair Siddiqui, his book is very dated in the sense that the people that he quotes, like Horowitz and Keitani and Robson and Goldziher, these were people that were present and writing on this topic at that time. So when Azami wrote his book, which was in the 70s, well, he published his Ph.D. thesis in 67, and then he wrote his beginner book after his Ph.D. thesis. He actually was making reference to the book that he read 15 years ago, which was this book by Mohammed Zubair Siddiqui. Again, I only give it for your perusal so that you have a quality book, even though it's quite dated, a quality book that you can look at in regards to hadith. And here he's talking about, on page 151, the system of isnad, which is chains, or the chain of transmitters. And again, I'll just give you my explanation of what a chain of transmission is, and then you can read this definition from an academic on the topic. He also goes through the historical relevance of transmission. So he talks about Christian scripture, Jewish scripture, and then the Hindu presence of chains of transmission in Hindu literature. And he gives quite a large precedent to one scholar called Ibn Hazm al-Zahiri, who mentioned in the 4th century, because he died in 456, the presence of isnad in Christian and Jewish scripture. So what an isnad basically is one person narrating to another person, narrating to another person, narrating to another person, and this chain, it could have multiple people in each link and each stage of the chain, but ultimately it goes back to the Prophet Muhammad, and at the end of the chain it's recorded by one of the traditionists. That is what the isnad is, and it's displayed quite uniformly in different authors when they write about isnad. Some people are more detailed than others, and I'll give you examples of each type of isnad as it comes up. So this is another good book, Mohammed Zubair Siddiqui, and it's called A Beginner's Guide to the Hadith, and it has other slightly different titles, but the author is Mohammed Zubair Siddiqui. Stay tuned for many more parts.
Tablighi Jamaat people, how they narrate only weak hadith. That's not the right, that's not the true, brothers.